You know, every year I do a presentation on Calvin and Hobbes. No, this is in the light. Every
I'm
year
just
I
gonna
do
be
a
standing next
presentation
to
on
the thing.
history of Calvin and Hobbes. Now, this presentation on Calvin and Hobbes is also a presentation discussing my feelings on the history of peanuts. So now what I'm going to do this year is present a completely fair and non-biased version of the history of peanuts. So here we go. Oh. Yeah, you think I'm going to do that? No. All right, I'm going all out this year. I've had a bad year, so I'm going to
Rip on
I'm
peanuts.
not. I recall starting a race war in a sophomore year over this. Oh, you don't even know. But anyways, this is the history of Calvin Hobbes, the superbest cartoon strip in existence, which is undoubtable.
What?
This Promethean board has some strange coloring. So in regards to actual history, Bill Watterson, the creator of Calvin Hobbes, was first born in 1958 in Washington, D.C., but later relocated to Ohio in 1965. He drew his first cartoon strip at the age of 8 about Batman. It was terrible. I've seen it. He put it in his big volume of every comic strip he's ever written. It was the summation. It was a picture of Batman beating up a bad guy with Robin on his side. It was terrible. He was inspired in his early life by great comic strips such as Pogo, Crazy Cat, and Charles Schulz, who is the creator of Peanuts. He actually wrote a letter to Charles Schulz in his early life and received a personal letter written personally by Mr. Schulz back, which sort of inspired him for a significant portion of his life. In high school, he drew a lot of superhero comics. None of those were saved or in any archives, so if you look for them, you'll only find his crappy 8th grade cartoon strip. He attended Kenyon College from 1976 to 1980, earning a bachelor's degree in political sciences. Interestingly enough, he drew political cartoons during college. If you were to look at these different cartoons, you would see a variety of sort of his starting more beginner style, which was the sort of style that would later develop into the style of Calvin and Hobbes. After attending college, he was hired to the Cincinnati Post and then was fired because he knew nothing of Cincinnati. He hated the job anyways.
Win-win. A win-win situation.
Yeah. Although he was left jobless, and then he had to go to a small advertising agency where he made grocery advertisements, which he also hated. But on a fateful day in 1985, about Calvin and Hobbes. So his first cartoon strip of Calvin Hobbes was first premiered in a newspaper in 1985. He actually never got to see that first strip in a newspaper. The newspaper was not distributed with Calvin and Hobbes in it, where he was currently living at the time, and he was. There are some of the another interesting fact is that one of the early designs for Calvin had his hair not being spiky, but rather clouding and obscuring his face. That would have been terrible. Calvin Hobbes aired his first strip on November 18th, 1985, so a little bit before Thanksgiving. The strip lasted for 10 years, finally ending in 1995, much to the great sorrow of many patriotic, kind, and loving souls and the delight of peanut lovers everywhere. Not really, that's not a fact, but it's what I like to think because I like to build up peanuts as the great evil in my mind. But anyways, Calvin Hobbes did evolve a lot over the years. For example, initially Hobbes on his paws, you could see these black pads. Those disappeared after a while. There were some mistakes in Calvin and Hobbes, such as Calvin did have an uncle initially. I forget what his name was. But it doesn't matter because he was No. He became irrelevant. He only appeared in one storyline, and then Bill Watterson decided that he was uncreative and kind of bland and boring.
I like this uncle.
I'm getting something from Ohio. Must be Bill Watterson. Bill Watterson has since fought to keep his strip from being exploited by corporations for merchandising. Now, a movie was made in 2014 called Hello, Mr. Watt. There was a movie about how Calvin and Hobbes created in 2014. I have not seen it, unfortunately, regarding the Calvin and Hobbes strip. But unfortunately, a lot of Bill Watterson's content has been exploited for the purpose of company logos and merchandising. For example, if anyone's ever seen the graphic of Calvin
peeing on something?
Yes, peeing on something.
Yeah, it's on one of the cars that I walk past on my way to school.
Yes, that is an example of something that was illegally done by a company exploiting Calvin and Hobbes' content without Bill Watterson knowing. So he's tried very hard to
crack down,
prevent such from happening. And that's the end. No. I'm sorry, I'm not ending it there. Anyways, part 2 is an entirely unbiased analysis of Calvin and Hobbes versus other cartoon strips.
That seems pretty biased to me.
I haven't even begun.
That's biased.
Oh, hold on. All right. So the first thing is art. Now, if you look here, this is an example of a common closet for jokes. Closet implying a source of jokes for Calvin Hobbes, where he would take weird snowman figures and then place them and then make some sort of joke out of them. So here, Calvin built a snowman house of horror. Now, if you look at it in comparison to other artworks, actually, Peanuts is not the worst culprit of having crappy artwork. It's actually, I would say, Garfield. A lot of the character models are reused constantly. As you can see, Garfield has been reused multiple times throughout the same frame, as has John. These are common throughout the entirety of the Garfield comic strip. And Peanuts, though having a more minimalistic artwork style, doesn't do it as badly. But if you see here, these are pretty much the same thing. Now, Calvin and Hobbes also is very innovative in its art style. So if you look here, this is all drawn by Bill Watterson. So this is so he sort of has experimented with different art styles. This is his traditional one. This is his, it's more of a realistic style. And then here, it's based a little bit off of film noir. This is actually from a series of cartoon stories called Tracer Bullet. He actually hated drawing these. He loved writing them, but he hated drawing them because it sort of inverted the use of negative and blank space, where he had a lot of negative space had to be filled by ink. Good thing for him, though, newspapers actually did hate to print these, largely because they required more ink and costed more to print. Innovation. Now, Calvin and Hobbes is widely known for its extreme innovation in regards to Sunday strips. Sunday strips are those big, long comic strips that are colored and occupy a much larger space. If you look at a classical Sunday strip, you have the throwaway gag at the beginning. So you'll have an illustration here and a throwaway gag, illustration here and a throwaway gag, and then you'll have a longer storyline in the next 3 panels. Not so with Calvin and Hobbes. Instead, Calvin and Hobbes did have some that were similar to this format, but you'll have, for example, the panels illustrated within Calvin and Hobbes on many of the Sunday strips are oftentimes have great variance in their shapes and sizes. And they overlap commonly to create a more, in my opinion, lively narrative. This is what I think is like the pinnacle of his innovation, where you have the entire Sunday strip. You have 2 panels right here overlapping this one extremely large, vivid, and energetic panel. So this is just Calvin is renowned for being really bad at school, so this is him getting an A. And then this is what we all envision what would happen if we got an A on a test, but really we just get it. Our parents pat us on the back and say, good job, and then they leave and then you fail your next 3 tests. Anyways, this is another example. I also appreciate this one because this particular panel, this particular strip doesn't necessarily convey a lot of the narrative through the use of words, which is a quite common occurrence in many of the great Calvin and Hobbes strips, which a lot of other cartoon strips have been unable to achieve in the past. Comedy. Now, it is my opinion that Calvin Hobbes' use of both dry and slapstick comedy is far superior to that of other similar strips. For example, with Garfield, you have the very pervasive joke of hating Mondays, and the same thing occurs with Peanuts, where you have Lucy